It was the morning of August 7, 1967, when a man named João Acácio Pereira da Costa was in a bakery in Curitiba, having coffee, and was surprised by the movement of police officers around the establishment. At that moment, no one inside the place now, but João Acácio was the most sought-after criminal in Brazil. When he noticed the police presence, he managed to leave without drawing attention and headed to his house, where his plan was to arm himself and die fighting against the police, as he did not wish to end up in custody. However, when he arrived at his house, he was startled by a demand, and that morning the crimes of Headlight Bandit, as he was now, would finally come to an end in the 6 seconds. São Paulo already had more than 3 million inhabitants due to population growth and the development of capitalism. The loss in environmental space was expected, thus giving way to Avenida Paulista and Avenida Faria Lima, which soon became major urban development centers. In addition to his, became major urban development centers. In addition to his, during the same period, the automobile industrial hub emerged in the ABC region, which increased vehicle usage in Brazil, including criminals, and one of these people was João Cássio Pereira da Silva in his 20s, and at that stage of his life had already been overtaken by violence, not only by the violence, but also by too uncontrollable impulse to possess more and more things and people.
When João Acácio arrived in São Paulo, nobody could imagine that in a short time he would become the most wanted man by the state police department. São Paulo was at its peak, but unfortunately, the presence of this criminal would shake public safety in the capital. These crimes began on the night of October 1966, when he infiltrated the backyard of the residence of a 19-year-old student named Walter Bidron. However, the young man saw João sneak into his house and tried to surprise him with a shotgun in his hands, but the criminal was quicker and managed to shoot first Walter's head. At the time, this crime shocked the residents and caused a great deal of public commotion. 10 days later, the news reported a bar fight that resulted in the death of a 23-year-old worker named José Enéas da Costa. This had taken place in the Bela Vista neighborhood, and through witness, a spoken portrait of the killer was made. When this happened, the case was not related to Walter Bidran's death, but it would only be a matter of time until the pieces came together.
After his second murder, João Acácio decided to stay away from new serious crimes and carried on with his life in São Paulo with small thieves. That was until June 7, 1967, when he broke into the residence of a 44-year-old businessman named Jan von Christian Schwarzerspatrak, who called the criminal walking around his house. In response, we also armed himself and two started gunfight, resulting in the businessman's death. Before fleeing, João took the some things with him. The following month, João would get involved in a more horrific crime when he broke into the residence of criminal lawyer Elias Assad. There, we did not find the lawyer, but his 22-year-old daughter, Ingrid Hasbeck Assad. During the robbing, João decided we would sexually assault the young woman, but she resisted and he fired at the woman point blank. Luckily, the project passed a few centimeters from Ingrid's heart, but it still caused a large wound, which left it incapacitated. However, the sound of the gunshot had attracted the attention of the house guard, José Fortunato. One upon arriving was surprised by the criminal using Ingrid's body as human shield. Due to this, we could not react and ended up being shot dead by the criminal. Then, João grabbed the few items he had managed to steal and fled from the residence. When Ingrid was questioned by the police, she described the criminal and said that we wore a cloth covering his face and a flashlight with a red beam of light that seemed to serve to intimidate.
So, the forensic team reported several fragments of fingerprints that had been collected from the window of one of the burglarized mansions. Even sexual assaults were being attributed to the criminal who, according to the victims, used the same tools as the Red Lights bandit. The investigators then began to search for the identity of the person behind them, easily finding João Acácio Pereira da Costa, an individual with a long history of run-ins with the police. This gave rise to a massive manhunt for the suspect, who was notably found in another state.
On August 8, 1967, thanks to an operation that included various departments of justice in Brazil, the Red Light Bandit was located in Curitiba. The investigators found that João was hiding under the false identity of Roberto da Silva. As mentioned earlier, he was spotted inside a bakery, but that morning the police had already found his residence and prepared an ambush. When the criminal noticed the movement, he returned home and was immobilized by the police officer who used a judo move on João. When arrested, he explained that he had returned to arm himself with his Taurus 38 revolver and his Smith & Wesson 32 pistol. João wanted to fall fighting, but he was frustrated. Proof of this was when he arrived at the police station in São Paulo, he tried to commit suicide, but not succeeded. Due to the successful arrest, the newspaper widely reported the story of the Red Light Bandit, who by then had committed dozens of robberies. According to him, he had burglarized at least 20 mansions. He explained that he had bought the light from one of the Americanas store and used to cut off the power to the houses to break in the middle of the night. However, Jean was much more interested in talking about everything that had happened that led him to commit the robberies and homicides than about the crimes themselves. In his narrative, he depicted that his life was full of difficulties.
João Acácio was born in July 1942 and he became an orphan at the age of 4. By his side was his older brother, Joaquim Tavares Pereira. Both ended up under the supervision of their uncle, who subjected the boys to forced labor so that they could receive food. At the time, the uncle denied these accusations, as well as denied having tortured them, something that João Acácio had also told the police. In fact, from the start, the criminal tried to leave no doubt about how hard his life had been. During interrogation, he told investigators that in adolescence, he had been violated by older boys. According to João Acácio, this humiliating moment changed everything in his life. In the following years, he would get involved in several minor thefts, reaching his peak when he decided to go to São Paulo. There João hid from crimes committed in another state but took advantage of his stay in the capital to commit small robberies and then return to his hometown. He also went to Rio de Janeiro, where, according to him, he stole more than 50 cars. In his early 20s, he was about to become the Red Light Bandit.
João explained to investigators how he used it to fool the police. For this, he acted in 4 different ways throughout the state. In some cases, he robbed the residences and then set fires to the surroundings of the houses to wake the residents. In the second mode, he wore a mask and stole only Jews. His third was, perhaps, the most creative. He called it Monkey Bandit, where he used a car jack to open the windows of the place he burglarized. Also, the bandits used a prominent red flashlight to intimidate people. João admitted that there were months when he was burglarizing 4 days a week and always operated from 2 to 4 in the morning. In his free time, he liked to spend the stolen money on fancy, brightly colored clothes such as red. He also used it to pretend to be a musician, carrying a guitar that he had stolen, even though he didn't know how to play. The rest of the money was spent on women. São Paulo police were incredulous at how João Acácio had organized his crimes, as well as a psychopathic and manipulative approach. At no point during the interrogation did he feel remorse or mention his victims. All that mattered was what he had done to get to that moment of his life. He was proud of his acts, but from the moment on, he would have to face their consequences.
On January 5, 1998, he got involved in a bar fight with Little Pinzegger, a man who had previously threatened him. It seems that Little had earlier accused João of sexually harassing his mother and wife. After the conflict, the two tried to reconcile, but on the day when Little stained his hand, João Acácio pulled out a knife. In response, Little's brother Nelson, who had been observing the conversation with a shotgun in hand, shot João in the head. The headlight bandit was dead. The shooter was later activated by the Joinville justice system, confirming the act as self-defense. According to Nelson, at that moment he had to choose between João Acácio and his family.
On January 5, 1998, he got involved in a bar fight with Little Pinzegger, a man who had previously threatened him. It seems that Little had earlier accused João of sexually harassing his mother and his wife. After the conflict, the two tried to reconcile, but on the day when Little extended his hand, João Acácio pulled out a knife. In response, Little's brother, Nelson, who had been observing the conversation with a shotgun in head, shot João in the head. The red light bandit was dead. The shooter was later acquitted by Joinville's justice system, confirming the act as self-defense. According to Nelson, at that moment he had to choose between João Acácio and his family.